my internet friends, and welcome. In this video, we're going to learn to create drama and suspense with some really beautiful, amazing chords. Okay? These chords are going to create drama, suspense, and tension. Okay? They're also going to have a dark, dissonant, and eerie sound. We're not only going to meet the awesome diminished chord, but we're going to learn 5 ways to use it. A lot of people are afraid of these chords because they sound so wild, but they're actually the most usable and the coolest sounding chord if you just know what to do with them. And you're going to learn what to do with them here. Now, when we use diminished chords as passing chords or for chord substitution, they're going to be diminished 7 chords. Okay? All diminished 7 chords share the same shape. So if you look at this shape here, all the chords are going to be exactly like this. Now, a diminished 7 chord may simply be called a diminished chord. Any note in a diminished 7 chord can be a root note. So if we look here, this chord has a G sharp in it, an F, a D, and a B. Now, this is actually a G sharp diminished, it's an F diminished, it's a D diminished, it's a B diminished. This could be any of those diminished chords. Now it's important to note here that all the diminished chords are diminished 7 chords, which may also be called fully diminished or just diminished chords. Diminished triads should not be used for any of these examples. They won't work well. Now the first way we're going to use these is as secondary diminished chords. Now, these are like secondary dominants. With a secondary dominant, I have a whole lesson on that you can check out at playukulelenow.com. With a secondary dominant chord, you're taking any chord in a progression and you're sticking its dominant before it. So if we had an A minor, the dominant of A minor is going to be E7. We just stick an E7 before it. We're doing the same thing here with diminished chords, and this is probably the most popular way to use these. Now, for a secondary diminished chord, here's a rule. Any chord may be preceded by a diminished chord 1/2 step lower. So, A minor may be preceded by G sharp diminished, or we could call that an A flat too. Let's look at a chord progression. We're going to add some diminished chords to it to spice it up. So our progression is C to A minor to F to G7, a 1-6-4-5 progression. And now we want a diminished chord before that A minor. So what do? Okay, what note's a 1/2 step below A minor? It's a G sharp. Okay, so we just find a G sharp and we make sure that's in the chord. It's as simple as that. We just build a chord, make sure the G sharp is in it, and we're going to have a G sharp diminished chord. So now our progression is C, G sharp diminished, A minor. This is the most common place we find a secondary diminished chord, is preceding the 6th chord. Now let's continue on. Our next chord was an F. What is a 1/2 step below the F? Well, that's an E. Okay? So we build a diminished chord, and we just make sure that we have the E in it, and we're going to have our E diminished chord. So now here's our completed progression. The A minor is preceded by its secondary diminished, which is G sharp or A flat. It's a 1/2 step below A minor. The F is preceded by its secondary diminished. E is a 1/2 step below F. Okay. We could continue on here. You know, we could put one in front of the G and one in front of the C if you wanted to. What you could do here is you can put them anywhere. You could just throw one in a progression somewhere. You could throw quite a few of them in. Okay? They can go anywhere before any chord. It's as easy as that. Another way we use diminished chords here is in connecting chords. So here's the rule. A diminished chord can be used in between 2 chords that are a whole step apart, providing chromatic movement. So if they're a whole step apart, on that note in between, we just slip in the diminished chord. As an example, we go from C major 7 to C sharp diminished to D minor 7. Okay? Now, the most common place we find a diminished chord connecting chords is going to be a sharp 4th like this. In the key of C, we may find this where we have an F, an F sharp diminished, and then a G. Okay? Maybe in part of a song for a dramatic effect. Something like this. You're going to find this in lots of popular songs today. In this common progression, it provides a chromatic movement from the C to the D. We got C major 7, C sharp diminished, D minor 7, and then G. This is also a very popular chord progression. Using a diminished chord in this way is just going to create that chromatic movement. You can put it between any two chords. Any two chords. Try it anywhere. Very easy to use that one too. Now, the diminished can be used as a dominant. Okay? The 7 chord may be substituted for the 5 chord. Okay? So, if we had a D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7 progression, we could change that G7 to a B diminished. Okay? Our original progressions, D minor 7 to G7 to C. Okay? Our 5 chord is our G7, and then we could just swap out that 5 chord for the 7 chord. You can do this with any progression, okay? Any progression. It's interesting to note here that the B diminished is the same exact chord as the G7 flat 9. So, almost every progression has a dominant chord. This is something you can always do with that dominant chord. Now, you can use it as a passing chord to a minor chord with the same root. So here's the rule. The diminished chord can be used as a passing chord to a minor chord that shares the same root note. So D diminished goes to D minor 7. Here's an example. We got D diminished to D minor to G7 to C major 7. Do this with any minor chord in any progression. And what you also may want to do is, this may appear where you play the minor chord and then you play the diminished chord after. It gives you kind of a wild effect. It appears that way in pop music as well, kind of a flipped scenario. Okay? Now, it can be used as a passing chord a half step above a dominant. So here's the rule. The diminished chord can be used as a passing chord to a dominant from a half step above. So a G sharp diminished to a G7. Here's an example here. D minor 7 to G sharp diminished to G7 to C major 7. Here it is as a passing chord, 1/2 step above the dominant. These are some of the most common uses to get you started. Now keep in mind there's lots of different things you can do with diminished chords. This is just really the tip of the iceberg on how you can use these beautiful chords. If you'd like to learn how to create beautiful chord progressions in any key, grab my Secrets of the Chord Chain book. That way you can take everything you learn here and apply it to many more chord progressions. Check out the link in the description for my free chord book. And also I've got all scales harmonized with chords. These are all free PDFs that you can download. If you like what you see here, smash that like button, okay? Subscribe, and hit the bell so you're notified when I upload a new video. And visit me at playukulelenow.com, where there's lots more great things like this, and you can learn a lot about chord substitution and chords and so forth. If you like this, you're going to love playukulelenow.com. So now you know a few ways you can use diminished chords. You should be able to start using these right away. They're absolutely beautiful. Probably the most amazing chords, really. I thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.